Forchion is definitely an aggrieved person. He's been incarcerated very, very clearly for speech and for beliefs. And Judge Irenas in Camden was able to readily see this.
We receive over 1,000 intake letters a year at the ACLU, but one of them stood out, and that was a video that was sent on ads that Ed tried to have put on Comcast, on cable, and they were rejected. This seemed to be a case that was right up the alley for the ACLU of New Jersey. It was about the right of an individual to be able to speak out against a law that he believed to be unjust. And there was a distinction here, and we made the distinction between advocating imminent illegal activity and advocating a change in the law. And what Ed was doing with those ads was advocating a change in the law.
There's nothing like this case. I mean, this case has it all. 28 substantial violations that I list in here in my brief. That's just one point, a pattern of abuse by the state to this man's rights. Really, I've never seen a case where there are so many constitutional violations, especially with a plea. It's just fascinating. It's like a criminal law exam, just one thing after another, all against Mr. Forchion.
I'm here before one of the world's greatest symbols of freedom to let you know the liberty this flag represents is in grave danger. As with alcohol prohibition in the 1920s, the drug war is destroying our free society. Even our First Amendment freedoms of speech and religion have been weakened. Now, saying legalized marijuana in public can result in the government taking away your child. This has happened to me. It's time we return freedom to America by ending the war on drugs. It's really a war on individual liberties, and that's just un-American. I'm a father of 4. I have 4 children of my own. This is my second marriage. My wife has 4 children of her own. So together, between us, we have 6 kids. 2 of hers are mine. You know, I've always been a family man. I do believe in family. My kids are my life. I could not have stood, you know, going to jail, not being a father for a decade, you know, over marijuana. Well, I grew up in the Sicklerville area, which is in lower Camden County. I consider myself middle class. I had a trucking business. I've always been a pot smoker, but you know, once I got arrested and I was on the spotlight, then I went from there and started fighting not only for my life, but fighting for the rights of everyone.
How did you become the New Jersey Weed Man, and what does that name mean to you?
Once I got on the internet, it became one of my first screen names, New Jersey Weed Man. And then after I got arrested, it just progressed on. Once the newspapers picked it up, I became the Weed Man, officially.
In November of 1997, Ed Forchion was arrested, charged with conspiracy and possession with intent to distribute marijuana. And what happened was he was found in a car alone, following a van which contained about 40 pounds of marijuana, which had been picked up in a controlled delivery by law enforcement. There was never any marijuana in Mr. Forchion's car. There was no actual, or what they call constructive possession by Mr. Forchion. 3 people were indicted. The 2 other co-defendants pleaded guilty. Mr. Forchion insisted he was innocent, had nothing to do with the marijuana. He was just in his car without the marijuana, happened to be behind the car, and he maintained his innocence and said, "I'm going to trial." Basically what happened was the public defender assigned a lawyer, and his defenses were eviscerated. He wanted to raise jury nullification. He wanted to raise the defense of medical use and necessity of marijuana due to medical condition. And I'm going to address these issues as we proceed. He wanted to raise the religious exemption under Rastafarianism and numerous other issues that are substantial and legitimate issues. the public defender's office, out of hand, in my opinion, and in my brief, my appeal, dismissed these attempts by Mr. Forchion to raise these issues. Mr. Forchion, in any event, said, I'm still going to trial.
I was arrested here in New Jersey. I understood the concept of jury nullification. A lot of people don't understand that, but once I was arrested, the first thing the police officer said was, anything you say and do can and will be used against you. Well, I always took that to also mean it can be used for you. In a jury of 12 to 14 people, there'd at least be 2 or 3 people who believed marijuana should be legal. Knowing that a jury is empowered to judge a law as well as facts, I figured I was going to fight and argue that the law was wrong, and just argue that to the jury and hope for a jury nullification verdict, or at least a hung jury, where the jury would say, you know, he's right, the law's wrong. So I wanted to put on a case where I wanted a truth defense. I believe the laws are based on lies. So I wanted to present a factual defense that the laws are based on lies, and the truth is marijuana doesn't fit the description of a Schedule I drug.
Jury nullification is where a defendant essentially says he didn't do anything wrong, the law is wrong. That's basically what it is. And it's a traditional American right. It's been around since the Founding Fathers actually wanted it as one of the tests that must be passed before somebody loses their liberty and gets incarcerated. You have, number 1, representatives. You have, number 2, the Senate. You have, number 3, the executive branch. You have, number 4, you have judges. And last but not least, you have the jury. Now, the Founding Fathers wanted the jury to have the legal right to say a law is wrong, because obviously America is based on freedom.
A jury may be presented the truth as evidence. It also says the jury may judge the law as well as the facts. So as evidence, I wanted to present the truth about marijuana. Say the government says that marijuana has no value, that it's addictive, you know, a couple other lies. When I know marijuana has value, I know marijuana is not addictive, and these are the truths that I want to present to the jury as evidence.
Have you heard our government's claim that marijuana is dangerous, addictive, and has no medical value? I have, but I also know the scientific facts. Marijuana has never killed anyone, is beneficial to many, and has been used as a medicine for thousands of years. Even doctors are openly challenging the myth that marijuana is dangerous. Many of them recommend marijuana to treat a number of medical ailments. Who do you believe? Your doctor or your politician?
In 1895, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that judges could no longer inform juries that they could veto an unjust law. Corporations had lost many trials against labor leaders trying to organize unions. And basically what happened was the corporations applied pressure to the president, the Supreme Court, and a case came down, and that case was called Sparf, and that said you can no longer give jury nullifications. In fact, juries must be instructed they have to follow the law. That's where we are now in this country. Now, Mr. Forchion is trying to change the law. Mr. Forchion is saying, hey, we abolished slavery, we abolished the unions being hammered by the government, prohibition, which was a ridiculous law, was abolished, all because of jury nullification.
And you were accused of importing 40 pounds of marijuana. That seems like a lot. Was that for your personal use, or what did you intend to do with it?
Well, obviously I was going to smoke some of it. I couldn't smoke all of it. I have no problem admitting that I've provided marijuana to other people. I've helped other people obtain marijuana. Marijuana is something that people want. We want it. We're not addicted to it. We want it.
The case never got to the jury. You wound up with a plea bargain. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, what happened was, several times between the time I got arrested and the time I started trial, almost 3 years. During that time, I got offered several pleas, and I always said no. I was taking it to the jury. I wanted the jury to, to judge me. Well, the first day of trial, I went from facing 20 years to the first day of trial. The prosecutor dropped it down, offered me 8 years with 3 years in jail. I still said no. I still believe that I can get someone on the jury to agree with me, with my argument. I figured I'd get a hung jury and let the state do it again. Well, on the third day of trial, as I'm presenting my case, jurors were nodding their heads. I had one juror on the first day. She started crying, didn't want to be on the jury, and cried to the judge that she could not judge me and wanted to be off the case. And because she said she couldn't send me to prison, her objectivity was gone. The prosecutor argued that she should be removed, and she was removed. Now, which is funny because I believe if someone argued that they would want to send me to jail forever, the prosecutor wouldn't argue for them to be off the case. So come the third day of trial now, I had 2 days. Several jurors were nodding their heads when I spoke. I was beginning to believe that I could get a hung jury. I believe the prosecutor was beginning to believe I was going to get a hung jury. For 3 years I had argued that you couldn't convict me. Not with my arguments. I believed that someone on my jury would agree with me, and sure enough, it was looking that way. So on the third day of trial, I was offered this deal of ISP, Intensive Supervision Program, which I would have to go to prison, and within 3 to 6 months, I would get this program called ISP. At that point, I am facing 20 years, plus not only did I have the charge that I was on trial for, I had also, after that original arrest, I got another arrest for marijuana, also a 15-pound case. So again, even if I got off on this hung jury, I was facing another trial and possibly being retried on that charge. So the prosecutor, offered a deal to combine both cases together, all my cases together, and give me ISP and one conviction. 3 to 6 months. I had never been to prison, but I thought I could do 3 to 6 months with no problem. So I took the deal. Which I called it. I took the deal for my kids. I wouldn't take the chance on not being there for high school or anything else. So I took the deal.
Marijuana is a drug with, just as alcohol is a drug and just as nicotine is a drug, but the government has seen fit to visit upon people that are involved with this drug draconian penalties that make absolutely no sense. So the prosecution in the first place is probably the most egregious aspect. I would say, secondly, what's most egregious is that Ed Forchion has been prosecuted not so much for what he has done, but for what he says and for what he believes.
How long did you wind up spending in prison on your 3 to 6 months charge?
Well, the 3 to 6 months turned out to be a bait and switch. I took the deal thinking I'd be in prison for 3 to 6 months. Well, a month after I got in prison, I get a letter in the mail one day saying I'm not eligible for ISP for extensive criminal history. I'm like, what? I don't have an extensive criminal history. This is the first time I've ever been to prison, first time I've ever been convicted. All it was after I was out of the limelight, after I was in jail, the state tried a bait and switch. They switched the deal on me. So from prison, I started screaming and hollering, writing everybody. I wanted to withdraw my deal. The state reneged on his deal, so I put a motion in to withdraw my plea. The motion was denied, so then I was appealing that motion and arguing again that the state reneged on its deal. At that point, I got a little creative. I was writing people. I had my website totally changed to reflect my website being njweedman.com. I had my whole website reflecting that I was in prison illegally, that I had took one deal, and the state did a bait and switch. And what I did was, then I put in a petition to change my name to njweedman.com, submitted it to the court, and then mailed it to all the different newspapers across the country. And sure enough, when they picked up that this inmate wanted to change his name to njweedman.com, they go to my website and they see what I'm talking about. At the same time, they're writing stories about me wanting to change my name to njweedman.com. So now I had hundreds of people coming to my website reading not only about my name change, but reading about, you know, my the bait and switch. I think that motion to change my name helped me get released. So I spent 18 months in jail, just short of 18 months in prison, as opposed to the 3 to 6 month deal.
While you were in prison, did you meet a lot of other people who were in there for drug offenses, and what was your general impression of them?
I'd say 70% of the people that I was in prison with were all there for drug offenses. There were a lot of guys like say me. You know, I got a 10-year sentence, even though I got on ISP. If I fail with ISP, I have this 10-year sentence, meaning for the next 6 or 7 years, I have parole. If I get caught smoking a joint on, say, parole, I go back to prison. Now, technically, you know, a lot of people are in prison for, say, their original crime, and they go back on parole violation. And what the parole violation is testing positive for, say, marijuana or drugs. And, you know, there are a lot of people in prison for smoking a joint. You know, it's the #1 reason for parole violators. And parole violators make up a huge portion of the prison population.
You were released into the intensive supervision program, a parole program. Could you tell us a little bit about how that differs from regular parole?
Yeah, well, regular parole, you might have to give your analysis once a week. You're basically let loose. You know, people spot checking you, things like that. That's it. You're pretty much done your time. Well, intensive supervision program, I have a nightly curfew. I have a nightly call-in. I have to give urinalysis at least twice a week. It could be more. Breathalyzer, pop-up breathalyzers, you know, at any time. Basically, the ISP officer can tell you to do almost anything, and you have to do it. It's like you're in prison. In fact, one of the sayings or slogans of ISP is "It's prisons without walls." So your ISP officer actually serves as a CO, a corrections officer. He can come here and tell you to do anything. You better do it.
You say you were drug tested twice a week for the past 2 years. Have you ever failed a drug test?
Never. There's marijuana in prison. I could have smoked almost any day I wanted to. I could have done other drugs. I could have done heroin, cocaine. There were guys ODing in prison, which is amazing. I'm in prison for drugs, and there was just as many drugs in prison as anywhere else.
While you were out on the ISP release, last summer, 2002, you decided to make some public service announcements for broadcast on television. Could you tell us a little bit about those announcements and why you decided to make them?
I got out on April 3rd. About a week after, I gave several interviews with several different newspapers. And immediately, my ISP, the director of the ISP office, Mr. Tom Bartlett, warned me not to give interviews. The first time he warned me not to give interviews, and I basically told him I didn't realize that was a problem. You know, I've always considered myself an outspoken person. I've, you know, consider myself a First Amendment protester. I know what you can and cannot do. And I know, although I'm on ISP and I'm still considered a prisoner, prisoners don't lose their First Amendment rights. So basically, he was ordering me not to talk to the press. You know, I gave a couple more interviews. He got mad at me then, and then he gave me a specific order not to talk to the press, which I considered unconstitutional. So the first time when I violated that ban on talking to the press, he locked me up for 5 days, just threw me in jail. And I was just pissed. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I can't believe I'm in jail for giving an interview. I mean, I didn't test positive for marijuana. I didn't do any other drugs. I didn't commit a crime. I was in jail for talking to the press. You know, it's not supposed to happen in America. You know, and it really irritated me. I was, you know, not only am I a pothead, but I'm a patriot. I've served my time in the Army. I could have died protecting the Constitution. There's no way I'm just going to turn my head as my constitutional rights are violated. So he held me in jail for a couple of days, but immediately upon getting out, you know, I basically wanted to just do bigger and better then. You know, I wanted to, okay, it's going to put me in jail for doing an interview. I'm going to, you know, I argued to him, you know, that he was wrong, that I had a right to talk to the press. And he said, no, I didn't. That logic just went over his head. So in the meantime, I contacted Next Play Video and wanted to know if they were interested in helping me put together a political, basically criticizing the war on drugs, speaking about the First Amendment, basically criticizing the marijuana laws. And I did it. We made the commercials. I made arrangements with Comcast to air the commercials. Then I mailed all the commercials to several newspapers, several places around the country, letting them know that I was getting ready to air these commercials.
Have you ever wondered whether a drug-free America is a realistic goal? Many people are beginning to realize that it's just not possible to have both a free America and a drug-free America. I choose freedom. America's claim as leader of the free world is in jeopardy due to the war on drugs. How can we lead in freedom when we imprison more of our own citizens than any other country in the world? Does that sound like America to you? Let's return freedom to America. End the war on drugs.
Sure enough, once the newspapers wrote about these impending political ads touting or bashing the war on drugs with featuring me in it, my ISP officer arrested me again. And this time it became a power struggle where he was trying to send me back to prison, where I'm arguing it's totally unconstitutional. It took 5 months to straighten out. In the meantime, I sat in jail for 5 months. I wound up having to file a writ of habeas corpus to the federal courts. I knew the state court wasn't going to side with me. So I went to the federal courts and argued that me being in prison was a punishment for exercising my First Amendment rights. And I know, again, that prisoners don't lose your First Amendment rights. You lose certain rights, but you don't lose your right to free speech. I'm on this program, ISP. I'm considered a prisoner. Even though I'm at home, I'm considered a prisoner. So if prisoners don't lose their right to free speech, I can't be punished for exercising that right. And that was what my argument was to the federal courts. And after 5 months, federal judge Irenas, he saw it my way and he released me. You know, basically issued an injunction, told the state to release me, that my imprisonment was unconstitutional, in violation of my First Amendment right to free speech. And that's how I made it out.
There are a number of reasons why the ISP program could have put him back in jail, but an impermissible reason is for exercising his free speech rights.
Ed is a very vocal person. His vocality has gotten him into all kinds of trouble. He has suffered the consequences of it. He's suffered it well in the sense that it has, in fact, not caused him to give up, and he continues to be very vocal.
So right now he is free, and his First Amendment rights were violated, and he did not get the deal that he had been promised, which induced him to plead guilty. He's innocent. He pled guilty under duress.
What's been the effect of your jail time on your family, and how do you feel about that?
Well, the first time I went to prison, I did the 18 months. I mean, my wife hung in there. My wife, the whole 18 months, she came every single week. She missed 5 visits in 18 months. The kids came up there every week. I mean, even though my wife knew that I was right, she heard everything I said, other family members besides my wife, you know, a lot of people blame me too. A lot of people said, you pushed the state. You know, you did it. You got in their face. You knew you were going to piss them off, and you did. My own lawyer told me that I pissed the state off, but you know, I knew, you know, that I have a right. You know, I consider myself a First Amendment activist, protester. If you don't have First Amendment rights, there's no way you can protect any other right. If the First Amendment doesn't apply, if you don't have the right to free speech, you can't argue for the right to assistance of counsel, the Sixth Amendment. You can't argue for the right to a fair trial, the Seventh Amendment. You can't argue
the right to a speedy trial, the Seventh Amendment. You can't argue for anything. You can't argue about the cruel and unusual punishment, the Eighth Amendment. So if the First Amendment doesn't apply, you know, the rest of the Constitution is gone, and that's how I looked at it. You know, like I said, I'm not only am I considered a pothead, which I consider a compliment, but I'm a patriot. And if you threaten the First Amendment, you're threatening the whole Constitution. So I had to stand up for that, and that's what I did. I paid the price, and you know, it was stressful for the family. Obviously, I didn't think I'd be in jail for 6 months. When I did the commercial, I did know that I would pee off my ISP officer. I figured I would get arrested. I figured I'd get to go to jail for a couple of days and might be a little arguing here and there. And I'd pull out this piece of paper called the Constitution, and all would be well and said, and I'd be released. You know, my ISP officer would be told he was wrong, and that would be it. So I didn't expect to spend 6 months in jail proving the Constitution is still the law of the land. But, you know, so I proved it, but, you know, it's one of them things, being right and dead right. Okay, I was right. I'm glad I didn't die proving that I was right, but I was right. I wouldn't push it to that point again, I believe. I don't think I could put my family through it again.
Has Judge Irenas' decision changed the conditions of your parole? Are there any changes, or is it exactly like it was before you got arrested?
No, it's a totally different thing. Not gloating or anything, but the fact of the matter is, I stood up to the state, I stood up to ISP officers, and I ended up being right. ISP, when you're in ISP, you're in groups. Like, I was in a group with like 20 other guys. We had our meetings, the same officers, we had different things we did together. Well, I'm like a pariah. They do not want me in the group. So instead of going to group meetings or anything now, my ISP officers come here. They see me here. They might show up at my job. There's no problem. I've had a couple urinals test at the job, just step in the bathroom and go. But they don't want me to pollute the other ISP participants with the Constitution, with rights. You know, they don't want somebody, you know, questioning their authority. And that's not, like I said, how it started out being, but that's how it got perceived. They didn't want me. So at this point, they don't want me around other ISP people. But, you know, if they had it their way, they would throw me back in prison and separate me. But the federal judge intervened on my behalf. I guess they said, well, we can't throw him back in prison, but we don't have to have him in our program. So technically, I'm still on ISP, but I'm the only guy on ISP doing my time the way I'm doing it. I'm doing it more like parole now.
You free to speak your mind, or are you afraid of being arrested again?
Well, I always was free to speak my mind. That's how I look at it. I always was free to speak my mind. It makes me think now. I mean, I spent 5 months in jail, almost 6 months in jail. So it makes me think.
If you speak out against the law, that's what America's about, is dissent, the right to dissent. If you believe that a law should be changed, to speak out. It was important, in order for the government not to be able to chill speech in the way that they did, to ensure that someone like Ed, when they want to speak out against the government, speak out against the government policy, has the right to do so without fear of reciprocity.
I did go to the courthouse, Burlington County Courthouse, and I stood out there with a sign. You know, it took me a couple weeks to do that. But basically, you know, the First Amendment applies.
Could you tell us about the religion of Rastafarianism and how you became attracted to it, and what role it plays in your life?
Marijuana is considered a sacrament in Rastafari. You know, I just accepted God, and the way our Constitution is written, you know, we have a right to accept religion or accept God the way we want to accept God. And this method was acceptable to me and acceptable to my consciousness. I consider myself as a follower of one of the illegal religions in America, which is, if you say that loudly, you'll have people totally just don't believe you and want to tell you you're wrong. But hey, I just spent 5 months in jail for talking about an aspect of my religion.
Some people agree with you that prohibition has failed twice now, first with alcohol in the 20s and now with the other drugs. Why do you think so much money and effort is spent prosecuting people like you?
There's huge money involved in perpetuating the war on drugs. Whether the war on drugs is successful or not makes no difference. Makes no difference at this point. Actually, you can argue, people can logically argue that the war on drugs has been a total failure. 30 years ago, basically, it was only a little bit of cocaine out there, and the war was about marijuana. Here we are 35 years since the war on drugs started, and now you have drugs that you never even heard of 30 years ago. Then there's the part where I bring up a lot. There's a racist issue too to the war on drugs. You know, I truly believe that the war on drugs is focuses on minority communities a little bit more than this focus on the suburban communities, and as a result, the prisons are filled with minorities. You know, I was in prison with a whole lot of people who look like me. It actually defends some people that I call the war on drugs a racist war on drugs. And I don't mean that only black people, only Spanish people are going to jail, because trust me, I was in jail with a lot of white guys too.
Why don't you just move to the Netherlands or some European country, one of the many countries that have decriminalized marijuana recently? You wouldn't have to worry about arrest or incarceration.
Hey, I think these laws can be changed. If the alcohol prohibition at some point was beaten by we the people, I believe that the marijuana prohibition will one day be won by we the people. I wouldn't want to go anywhere else. Even though this war on drugs has infringed upon a lot of civil liberties, I believe that America is still the greatest country on the earth, and I wouldn't really want to be anywhere else. I feel that I'm an American. This is my country. Not only do I have a right to say what I want to say, I have a right to help change the laws.
For people who agree with you that the drug war is unjust and un-American, what would you suggest they do to help change things for the better?
Participate in the system. That's the best thing. There's been so many people disenfranchised by the system. So many people don't participate. I believe if the people who truly believe that the war on drugs is wrong just participated, voted. And when I say vote, there's no need to waste your vote on a Democrat or Republican. There are more people, I believe, more independents, more disenfranchised people than there are Democrats and Republicans. So if people who felt like us just voted, just participate in the system, just voted, whether it be a Libertarian, a Green Party, a Reform Party, just voted. I believe we can end the war on drugs just by voting out some of these Democrats and Republicans. Now that's one aspect of how you can change it. The other aspect is through jury nullification. Just register to vote. You register to vote. When that jury card comes in the mail, keep your mouth shut. Go on the jury if you happen to be on a drug case at the end, no matter what, as long as no one was hurt. Vote your conscience. Say not guilty. That was another way that the alcohol prohibition was lifted. Conviction rates went down. There was less than 50% conviction rates because you had people serving on the jury who didn't believe in the alcohol laws. So they keep their mouth shut. And when it all came down to it, they'd say not guilty, no matter how much alcohol the person got caught with. That's how this war on drugs could be ended, by all these organizations out here who so-called believe in reforming the marijuana laws, reforming the drug laws. If all these organizations started teaching jury nullification, started encouraging people to register to vote, we the people can win the war on drugs. We can just rip the war on drugs from the Democrats and Republicans who are waging war on us.
Ed, you've been an activist for several years now, and you've done some fairly outrageous things to make your point. Could you tell us a bit about the things you've done and why you've done them?
When I was arrested, I'm told, I was read my rights, my Miranda rights. Miranda says anything you say and do can and will be used against you at the time of your trial. So again, knowing I was facing a jury one day, I started doing things like running for office. 6 months after I was arrested, I was on the ballot running for office, and how I basically, instead of having a press conference, who's going to show up for me to have a press conference? Just some guy announced that he's going to run for Congress. So what I did was I called myself forming the Legalized Marijuana Party, I got a bunch of people to sign different paperwork, submitted it to the state. I was going to run for Camden County Board of Freeholders and U.S. Congress. Well, when I put my name on the ballot for the Board of Freeholders and I called all the newspapers, everyone was like, yeah, okay, whoop-de-doo. I said, okay. When I got enough signatures to run for the Congress, I went to Congressman Rob Andrew, who was the sitting congressman. So I decided to have a smoked in his office, and of course that brought the media and that brought everyone, man lights up joint in Congressman's office, and basically I was announcing I was running for office. And again, me announcing I was running for Congress and things like that under the legalized marijuana party, the long term was I wanted my jury to know about me. By running for office, I got to constantly say things in the press and things like that, and all these statements could be brought into trial, which again, I believe you had 14 people there, 12 people on the jury, 2 alternates. When I started bringing up statements, oh yeah, last month I said this, 2 months ago I said that. I mean, I was saying I was going to bring in my own statements as opposed to the prosecutor having to bring them up. I pull out the newspaper, this is a statement I made. I say the marijuana laws are lies. And then here I am in trial and I get to talk about that. So I was thinking, this was a way of making the jury think about my issues and perhaps judging the law. Same thing when I smoked in the State House. I went to the State House in front of all the politicians and lit up a joint. Again, it made the newspapers all across the state. Actually the Associated Press even picked it up, so it made it across the country and the world, actually. Again, my long-term goal was to one day have those newspaper articles in my trial so that the jurors would be able to see where I was coming from, which is amazing though. The state had a different reaction to that one when I smoked in the State House. Now here I smoked in the State House in front of all these politicians who enforced the war on drugs, and guess what? I never got prosecuted for that one. It's like they did not want me to come back, want a trial for that charge. They did not want me to go on trial for that, to bring more publicity. So that same publicity that I was seeking, they killed it by not prosecuting me for it. So of course, one day I might have to go back there.
I'd say our client is, in this case, the First Amendment, the Constitution. And that's what we were representing, what we believe was a proper outcome under our United States Constitution.
He's there when I need him. Well, when he's not in jail, he's there when I need him. But he's a very caring person.
I think the whole system has really victimized Ed. But it's in a lot of cases. I mean, I do pool work. I'm a private attorney. I take pool cases. Every public defender case, it's a nightmare. You can't get transcripts. Nobody cares. You get them, you can't read them a lot of times. They're indecipherable, and everybody's got an attitude. It's endemic to the system, and when it's the state paying for it, it's even worse.
Some people go to sleep without food. There's no explanation to live in this nation. Plenty of food and people live in starvation. Depreciation leads to segregation. Not to mention the racial tension.
Ed's activism has brought into focus many of the facets of what's wrong with our marijuana laws. And that's what makes Ed's case something that I believe affects many people.
Legalize marijuana. Well, there's a war going on.
I live in poverty. Why does minority? I live in poverty. Why does minority? I live in poverty. Come, it's saying this to me.
I told him to meet me in court. He was, we're going to have the reconstruction hearings to see whether the transcripts were accurate. And I got to court, and I couldn't find my client. I wanted to prepare. And I told him to meet me in court, and the prosecutor said, "Have you seen your client outside?" I go, "What do you mean he's outside?" He said he's outside protesting.